Good morning. Welcome to episode 98 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined, as I am each and every Tuesday, by the Hays Carlyon, who's the co-host of the Frangie Show, which you can catch on 92.5 FM and 1010 XL in Jacksonville from 4 to 6 p.m. each weekday. Today, Hays and I are going to be breaking down all of our observations on the NFL owners meeting media availabilities yesterday. Head coach Liam Coen talked to a scrum of reporters. Then he also talked briefly to News4Jax, or actually News Jacks. We're going to break down everything that we learned, especially as it relates to what the Jaguars are going to end up doing in the 2025 NFL draft. So with all that, Hays, welcome back. Happy April Fool's Day.
Yes, happy April Fool's Day. Good to be with you, Gus.
Yeah, I literally just noticed that it is Day, and so I guess that's a fortunate thing. I don't want to prank you or anything, but yeah, I don't have anything special in regards to that. But Hays, what was your first takeaway from Liam Coen's comments on Monday at the NFL owners meetings?
I thought, he hit on a lot of stuff. I think the biggest thing with me is just that growing relationship with Trevor Lawrence. And, it was interesting hearing Liam talk about, Trevor's mindset and, his eagerness to get healthy and be available and things like that and learning the offense. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how Liam does this, because I think in a lot of ways you want to almost start from zero with Trevor and assume nothing, because he's been so shaky with situational football. And Liam Coen is, talked multiple times about wanting to be situational masters. And, he was very complimentary of Trevor yesterday, as you would expect. He wants to build that connection with him. But I am curious, once we get out there for OTAs, how much we can pick up on the coaching directly between Liam and Trevor. Because, I think in a lot of ways, there's still a lot of growth that Trevor needs to make. Is a cerebral player and is a player that this is Hoops, one of our cats.
But cool name.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see, how it goes. But, he said the right things, very supportive, and talked about, Trevor's work ethic and things like that they're not able to do things yet, from an organization standpoint, and that's coming up. But, but that he's been very pleased with the work that Trevor's been doing on his own, and, that his health is good and getting to where it needs to be. So, and he talked about that Trevor is, understands that he's got to be better. So that whole thing, I think, is fascinating, because, we've talked about it. You're hoping that this becomes a 15-year partnership. You're hoping that this can be something that, 15 years from now would be a heck of a book. To see the foundation laid, I think is going to be very interesting, particularly once they're out on the field and we're able to sort of view in OTAs and training camp, kind of view that process before the regular season comes. And obviously we can't watch practice at that point.
Yeah, no, those are all great things. I think Liam Coen said both yesterday on Monday, but then also like his introductory press conference, that he knows like off the bat that Trevor is mentally, physically tough, and he has absolutely no question marks about that. And obviously kind of like the work ethic thing. He's talked before about like just getting Trevor into like a good routine so that it's like kind of easier to just develop and do well on a week by week basis and really progress as a quarterback, since he is still just 25 years young. And he said at some point yesterday, I can't find the exact quote, but talking about like honest conversations and how important that is. And he said that last year Baker Mayfield would like scream at him on the sideline sometimes, but he really didn't mind that, because like they need to have that type of communication where even if it got ugly at certain times, as long as it's always honest and you're always telling the other person like what is actually on your mind, rather than kind of like sugarcoating things or like dancing around certain topics and stuff like that. Obviously, like Liam Coen, from everything he said, is very excited to work with Trevor Lawrence. I have no doubt that he would not have accepted this job if Trevor Lawrence was not on the roster. But yeah, and so I think where it really starts is with those honest discussions. But speaking of honest discussions and just having conversations with important players on the team, I think my biggest takeaway from Liam Coen's availabilities yesterday was that he touched on, or he was asked about Trayvon Walker and the possibility of him getting a new contract extension this offseason. Coen said, yeah, we're having open conversations. At the end of the day, we'll continue to have those. James and Tony and I will have those conversations as we go for sure. And so he did verify that the Jaguars have had extension talks with Trayvon Walker. I think Dilla tweeted yesterday that it might end up happening in season. And so I feel like there's a pretty good bet that the Jaguars will extend Trayvon Walker sometime in the calendar year of 2025. What are your thoughts on that, Hays? Do you think it's like a no-brainer, even if there is a little bit of like sticker shock from what the eventual contract numbers will probably end up looking like because of like the huge rise in cap in recent years? Are you like happy to hear that they're having conversations? What do you feel about all this?
I think it makes a lot of sense for that to be the status of it. I mean, they have to re-sign him. I mean, he's a really good player, and a lot of people get wrapped up in the Hutchinson versus Walker thing. That's not, you don't base that on whether you pay Trayvon Walker or not. Trayvon Walker is a very good player in this league, and you've got to keep him. He's part of your core, part of your nucleus. Now, I understand new administration not wanting to just hand over a ton of money to a player that they don't know. And so, I think as they get to know Trayvon, I think they'll be very happy with what they have. And I think they feel like that's the path they're on too, that they like what they've seen on tape and, in their conversations. So, but I think it makes sense that it's like, look, show us what you can do for us. And that doesn't necessarily have to be, a full season. And we don't know about Gladstone and Coen, what their methods are in terms of wanting to, pay guys in season. Trent Baalke was against it because he, felt like, well, what if the offer isn't what the player wants? And now the player's disgruntled in the middle of the season and things like that. So, we'll see how this Jaguars administration wants to go about that. But the time is on their side. From a business standpoint, if everything wasn't new, I'd go ahead and pay him now because it's only going to get more expensive. And I'd want to pay him before the Lions pay Hutchinson because that's going to really magnify, because I mean, that's just going to create a headache because you're not going to want to pay him what Aiden Hutchinson's or more than what Aiden Hutchinson's making. And obviously Hutchinson's going to get one of the richest non-quarterback deals that we've ever seen, if not the richest. So from that standpoint, I think you'd like to get it done before then, but I don't know that you can just walk in and 2 months on the job, hand over a bunch of money to somebody who you hasn't done anything in your system yet. So I don't think it's a huge problem. I just would, I'd probably wait it out. And, but as soon as they know what they have in Trayvon, I would go ahead and try and lock him up just because you're just going to end up paying more. You're not going to let him walk and you don't want to enter into a thing. I mean, they could certainly drag it out. He could play this year. He could play next year on the 5th-year option. He could play in 26 on the tag, or I'm sorry, 27 on the tag, and then play on the tag again in 28. Before then, the team would pretty much have no recourse other than to let him go. But I don't think it'll come to that. I think he's an important part of what they're doing. I don't think it'll take long for them to see that. And, so whether it's midseason or at the end of the season, something like that, I would anticipate that they will eventually get a deal done. But I would think he'll have to play some pretty meaningful games before this administration will hand that kind of a check to him.
Yeah, I agree with that take. I think it does make sense for them to say, like, we are interested in extending you, and like maybe they'll get a deal done before the season kicks off if it ends up being kind of like team friendly and Trayvon like doesn't want to bet on himself, I guess. But I feel like it makes sense for him to bet on himself. As our guy Dell said in the comments, if he gets 6 sacks or more before week 5, he's getting extended shortly after. That seems like I don't know, like if not a likely scenario, then at least a plausible scenario. It'll be really interesting to see what the contract number does end up being. I'd be beyond shocked if it was more than Myles Garrett, who reset the edge market this offseason with a $40 million per year contract. But below him is Danielle Hunter at $35.6 million per year, then Max Crosby at $35.5 million a year, Nick Bosa at $34 million a year, and then Josh Hines-Allen at $28.3 million per year. So I honestly expect for Trayvon Walker to surpass Josh Hines-Allen's contract. And I honestly would not be surprised if Trayvon Walker ended up becoming like the second highest paid edge defender in the NFL this offseason, behind only Myles Garrett. And I think that the big reason why would be like, obviously you can like point to certain things that he does on the field and say like, yeah, this is a growing and ascending player who can be obviously like a starting caliber edge defender, but potentially a Pro Bowl caliber one as well. But then off the field, I think is like the most important thing in terms of, especially the fact that they've already started contract negotiations without having even like been to training camp or anything like that. I think it speaks to Trayvon's character off the field. I think he's certainly like the quote unquote intangibly rich kind of player or just person that they're looking to add, or not just add, but keep inside of the building once they do have those guys. And so, yeah, Coen expanded on that a little bit, not necessarily specifically with Trayvon Walker, but just in general, like when you think about intangibly rich and bringing in guys of high character that are both mentally and physically tough, like the way that he kind of summarized it was like, at the end of the day, is this a player that we want to coach and not wants to be coached? And I think that Trayvon Walker most certainly fits that mold. So I think obviously it's not as big of a news after yesterday when Liam Coen talked about it, but I think it's fair to say that Hays and I are expecting Trayvon Walker to get signed at some point and probably get signed to a really big deal. To move on, Hays, what else stood out to you from Liam's comments yesterday?
You know, he talked about a few of the new additions. He talked about obviously the massive influx of offensive linemen. And I think it's going to be really fun to see that battle because I think they've sort of thrown down the gauntlet to the in-house guys and said, buckle your chin strap because you better come to play this offseason and in training camp, or your job on this team, or certainly in the starting lineup, is going to be in jeopardy. I mean, you signed 2 offensive tackles, both of who are physical maulers that have started games in this league and fared well, and Fred Johnson and Adogba. You look at obviously you got a new center in Hansey. You've got we think a new right guard in Macari, and they could invest still obviously in that position. I think most of us believe they will. And with one of those first 3 selections, I don't know that it'll be number 5. I don't think you can discount it, but I don't think it'll be 5. But certainly that high second rounder or maybe the first third rounder could be an offensive lineman as well. So, I think that's going to be really exciting to see how that plays out. And, I thought Liam Coen kind of said it. He was like, look, we're not going to really know about it, about the competition here until we actually are able to do offensive line things. And that's going to take some time. But, I think the communication piece with Hainsey is interesting, obviously being in the system and helping Trevor out. And again, that's the key. Like, it seems like they're pretty cognizant of the fact that Trevor Lawrence probably isn't as cerebral as a football player as, maybe you would think he would be. And so, it seems like they've sort of immediately acknowledged that with getting a center that is familiar with the system, can help him with line calls and things like that, which is smart, makes a lot of sense. And so, that was interesting. But hearing him talk about Dyami Brown, I'm still not sold. I mean, I thought it was a strange deal. 1 year, $10-12 million deal for Dyami Brown, who, had a nice postseason, but other than that, hadn't really done anything in his NFL career. And, that'll be a really good litmus test because you can tell they've got a confidence, James Gladstone and Liam Coen, that they can find the hidden gem. they can find the diamond in the rough, and De'Ami Brown would certainly qualify if he ends up having a huge year here. I mean, that will really speak volumes about their ability to identify personnel. And, but it was interesting hearing Liam talk about, all the things De'Ami Brown can bring to the offense. And obviously speed and playmaking ability was the number one thing. Liam said, it's refreshing to hear coaches say this. Look, I can't teach him to make three guys miss. So there's not a lot of coaching involved when we just throw it out to De'Ami and, he makes some guys miss and breaks a big run. But, we'll see Jordan Lewis. He talked about, obviously, with the contested interception against Jalen McMillan, with Liam Coen, his Bucs offense last year. So that was interesting hearing, him talk about the competitiveness of Jordan Lewis. And, that is something that they want, obviously, physicality across the offensive line, but I think they also are looking for, toughness across the board, even in the perimeter, and Jordan Lewis fits that. So interesting hearing him sort of talk about those three guys, the offensive line additions, and, we'll start to see how it all fits together here in the next, month or so when we're able to get out there and start kind of watching them once they get on the field for phase 3.
Yeah, I'll circle back to the offensive line and the defensive line as well in a second. But I did want to read out the quotes from Liam Coen about both De'Ami Brown and Jordan Lewis. So I thought that they were pretty good. I guess not sound bites since I'm the one that's reading them, but pretty good quotes. On De'Ami Brown, he said, it's just another ball-in-hand athlete who can also take the top off the defense, right? We can't have it so that BT, as in Brian Thomas Jr., is always running vertical down the field, or we're not going to be able to target him quite as much, right? You start to get farther and farther down the field. Sometimes that percentage goes lower and lower. So we added a piece that helps somebody else get down the field where BT doesn't have to be that. And then also he does something that I can't coach. He makes people miss in space. So that was really cool. But I also thought it was like that was something that I was harping on before free agency, was that the Jaguars need to get a field stretcher, because even though they have like one of the top 2 or 3 field stretchers in the NFL right now, and Brian Thomas, like you don't want him to just get pigeonholed into that role, like the same way that we saw Calvin Ridley have that happen to him in 2023. So definitely like the fact that the Jaguars got another vertical threat to play alongside Brian Thomas. And then also I thought it was interesting, as you said too, Cohen's comments, that De'Ami Brown is something that they can't coach, which is being able to make people miss in space. And as a coaching staff, they can scheme players up to get them into space, but then what they do with the ball in their hands in space after that is kind of like up to them. And so I thought that was a good signing for sure. And then on Jordan Lewis, he said, man, he broke my heart last year. We were going down to win and take a lead against Dallas last year. We threw a post to Jalen McMillan. Looks like we've got it. We're going to take the lead, or at least tie to that point. But Jordan takes it out at the last minute, ends up being an interception for a touchback. You're like, man, that's just who he is. That's how he competes. It's to and through the whistle. Those guys that do it like that at a high level and are able to communicate at a high level, those are guys we're trying to bring in. I thought that quote was mostly interesting because he talked about how like he had his own personal experience of watching Jordan Lewis. I feel like De'Ami Brown is honestly a little bit of an exception as like a free agent, in that like he had no previous ties to the Jaguars in any kind of way, at least that I know of. But for the most part, free agents I think can be put into like kind of 3 different buckets. One is that like you have a relation with the coach on staff. So like Johnny Munt following Grant Udinski from Minnesota. 2 is that you like really liked the player when they were coming out of college, and so you're kind of like holding on to your pre-draft feelings on that player. So an example would be Hunter Long, because the Rams traded for him when he was just on the 2nd year of his rookie contract, and then he then followed James Gladstone to the Jaguars. And so it makes me think that maybe not James Gladstone specifically, but the Rams really liked Hunter Long before the draft. Another non-Jags example is that Cowboys VP Stephen Jones said yesterday that they were really excited about Jonathan Mingo because they were such a big fan of him coming out of Ole Miss, and think that his ceiling is still so high. And then the 3rd bucket is what Jordan Lewis is in, which is like a coach or like your team saw this player in action firsthand live and said, wow, that player is great. It'd be sweet to have him on our team. So that's kind of what happened with Jordan Lewis here. So again, I don't think that necessarily like none of that is necessarily new information about the Jaguars, but I just think it's an interesting note to make about how familiarity in a few different aspects is so important in free agency, but also for the draft too, honestly. Obviously, you're not going to be connected or have familiarity with every single draft pick that you have. But we've seen in the past in Jacksonville specifically for sure that like I think Walker Little was largely picked because like Urban Meyer formally recruited him at Ohio State and stuff like that. But yeah, to go back to the offensive and defensive line, I think one really interesting comment actually did not come from Liam Coen. It came from Raiders general manager John Spytek, who previously worked with Liam Coen in Tampa Bay. Spytek said yesterday, I was talking to Liam Coen yesterday, and he was like, Spy, the one thing I underestimated before I got here was how good the O-line was in Tampa. We had 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks in that line, and Ben Bredesen was a 4th-round pick, so you got to invest. And so, that almost feels like Spytek was accidentally tipping the Jaguars' hand. Maybe not necessarily for what they're going to do in the first round at pick 5 overall. I certainly expect them to heavily invest, probably spend 2 draft picks, honestly, on their interior offensive line, and maybe even draft another swing tackle, even though they kind of have 3 potential swing tackles on the roster. So with all that said, Hays, I'm just wondering if all of these comments and all these stuff that we've talked about so far as it relates to the offensive and defensive line have swayed your opinion on what the Jaguars will do with the 5th overall pick in the first round, or if you think that we shouldn't necessarily read into one day of quotes.
No, I think offensive line is in play. I think it's probably, if it's, what I would think is worst case scenario for them, where Shedeur Sanders does not go in the top 4, and then your top 4 is some variation of Cam Ward, Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Mason Graham. And then, you're sitting there and saying, okay, well, what are we doing here? Obviously, you'd like to move back, but you may not have a partner. And at that point, are you taking Will Campbell or Mimbu at offensive line? Are you taking Tedero McMillan? Are they going to shock everybody and take Ashton Genty? Could they take Jalen Walker and get an edge guy there? But it seems like that's the spot where you say, a little bit, if that's the scenario that plays out. And look, that could happen. I think Shedeur Sanders will go in the top 4, but you just don't know. So if that happens, then I think offensive line could be in play, because as I look at it, they're in a little bit of an advantageous situation compared to most new GMs and coaches coming into a situation because of, and we've talked about this, how much they already have their nucleus. You already have your quarterback. You've already got, 2 outstanding edge players. You've got a corner. You've got a big time receiver. And you've got at least 2 offensive tackles that are under contract that you've, made a fairly significant investment in. So in terms of those premier positions, you sort of already have that. And what that does is it allows them to have a little bit of slack in terms of how they want to build out the roster. And it allows them to be a little bit to the point where they can almost overcommit to fixing something. So even though they've brought in 4 free agent offensive linemen, and let's just be honest, all 4 of those guys, I mean, two of them are brought in to push the starting offensive tackle. So probably not being brought in specifically to start. The 2 guys that are being brought in to start, the center and the right guard, well, they're not being brought in to start for 5-6 years. I mean, they're being brought in until they find an upgrade. So in looking at it, they could say, yes, we've signed 4 free agent offensive linemen, but we're going to take an offensive lineman with the 5th pick, even if that player is going to be a left guard, at least initially. So I don't think it can be discounted at all, because they're in a position, I think, where they can overcommit to solving a problem. And they just may be, again, to Spytek's comment, the Jaguars may be so resolute in wanting to fix that offensive line that they may say, look, yeah, we signed 4 free agents, but we're going to still take a guy at 5 and we are going to throw so much at this position to ensure that we are going to have outstanding starters but outstanding depth as well. So I don't think it's what will happen, but I do think if they get stuck and there's no Hunter, Carter, or Graham on the board and they can't move out, yeah, they may go ahead and say, all right, we'll take the best offensive lineman in the draft. In our opinion, we'll take the first one off the board. And look, we'll just let the competition tell us what our best 5 is once we get, deep into August.
Yeah, it is hard to say like what's going to happen with the 5th overall pick, especially since like the Patriots seem to be very interested in taking either Will Campbell or Armand Membu, the consensus top 2 offensive line prospects, with their 4th overall pick right before the Jaguars. And even if the Jaguars are like internally in the building saying like our number 1 need, without a doubt, that we want to prioritize in the draft is offensive line, they might say that, but then still end up taking like Mason Graham, or I guess especially like Travis Hunter, because like if Travis Hunter is there, it's like, okay, like yeah, we really want to focus on the offensive line, but like we also kind of need to go best player available, and like Hunter's far and away the best player available.
You can't pass on
so, yeah,
I mean, you just can't. It would be malpractice of the Jaguars to pass on Travis Hunter. You cannot pass on Travis Hunter if he's. I don't think he'll be there, but if he is there, before ESPN goes to the commercial break that we all know is coming, the pick should already be in.
Yeah,
it should literally take 10 seconds. I wouldn't even field a trade call. It literally would be turn the card in.
Mm-hmm. You're pulling on the tracksuit. You're doing some stretches beforehand just so that you can make sure you really can't sprint to the podium in that scenario. Yeah, I agree with you there. And so, again, like 5th overall pick is a little bit tough because like they probably could/should go with like the just best player available, especially if that player is Travis Hunter and he's there at 5. But yeah, Liam Coen's comments yesterday, it certainly swayed me in that like offensive line is like a bigger need to them inside of the building than I thought. Because like obviously entering the offseason, like everyone in Jacksonville would have said the offensive line was like the top 3 positional need. But since they did add 4 free agents to the line, then maybe people have backed off a little bit. But yeah, I think even if they do pass on an offensive lineman in the first round to go with the best player available, probably someone on the defensive side of the ball, then I think they're definitely going to hammer offensive line early and often. We'll see what form that ends up taking. But yeah, real quick, Dale actually said that Gladstone said he wanted to draft De'Ami Brown with the Rams.
That's right.
Apparently, he referred to him as a guy he loves coming out of UNC, and Leslie texted him and said, "I should have known," with a screenshot of his scouting report. So there you go. You can put De'Ami Brown into that bucket of guys that like the front office really liked coming out of college, and so then they're going to get them at a discount in free agency a couple years down the line. And so that's pretty much all I've got. Hayes, you have any other final lingering thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, I got a big one. I want to congratulate you on a fantastic draft guide, and congratulate all the contributors to it as well. I know it was a lot of hands involved in that, but outstanding job, and I encourage everybody to go and download it.
Yeah, appreciate that, Hayes. I was completely blanked on it, so I'm really glad you said that. But yeah, definitely go check out the 2nd annual 1010XL draft guide. It's free PDF with 130 pages, over 100 profile pages of NFL prospects. We've got roundtable questions with myself and Hayes included. We've got big boards. We've got positional rankings. We've got it all. Again, it's free to download, and it's available at 1010XL.com. Shout out to Mia O'Brien, Taylor Daw, Trent Osborne, Jacob Justice, Caleb, whose last name I'm forgetting. But yeah, that certainly wasn't all me, but I'm glad it's done. So just looking forward to the draft now. But if you're looking for more information, go to 1010XL.com and check that out. Hayes, thank you as always for joining. We will see you next Tuesday. I'm sure to talk more NFL drafts, more Jacksonville Jaguars. So until then, thanks to everyone else for watching and listening. I will be back at 9:04 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. See you guys then.